Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Malcolm Dyer stood in his study, staring at the divorce papers scattered across his mahogany desk. 23 years of marriage reduced to legal jargon and asset division. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built an empire worth hundreds of millions, yet he couldn't keep his own wife faithful. Teresa Lewis Dyer had been his college sweetheart, a beautiful psychology major who'd captured his heart during his final semester at West Point. Back then, Malcolm was destined for military intelligence, his sharp mind and ruthless efficiency already catching the attention of his superiors. Teresa had seemed perfect, supportive, understanding of his demanding career, content to build a life around his ambitions. Their early years had been a whirlwind. Malcolm's military career took them across the globe, from classified operations in Eastern Europe to counterintelligence work in South America. Teresa played the devoted officer's wife flawlessly, hosting dinner parties for Malcolm's colleagues and raising their two children, Ruth and Kenneth, with apparent dedication. When Malcolm left the service after 15 years to start Dyer Security Solutions, Teresa had been enthusiastic. His company provided corporate security, consulting, and private investigation services, leveraging his intelligence background and military contacts. Within 5 years, DSS had become one of the most sought-after firms on the East Coast. But success, Malcolm realized now, had bred complacency. As his business grew, requiring longer hours and frequent travel, Teresa had grown distant. She'd started therapy, claiming she needed to find herself. She'd joined charity boards, taken up yoga, and begun spending time with a new crowd of wealthy socialites. The first red flag had been subtle. Teresa's sudden interest in expensive clothes and jewelry that even their considerable wealth couldn't easily justify. Then came the mysterious phone calls that stopped when he entered the room, the unexplained absences during his business trips, and the way she'd started questioning his methods and morality. Malcolm's training kicked in. He'd begun surveillance on his own wife with the same methodical precision he'd once used on foreign operatives. We discovered made his blood run cold. Armando Shepard wasn't just Teresa's lover. He was playing a long game. A smooth-talking investment advisor with a reputation for seducing wealthy married women, Armando specialized in what Malcolm's intelligence background recognized as a sophisticated honey trap operation. He'd romance them, gain their trust, then slowly extract information about their husbands' businesses and financial holdings. The surveillance footage was damning. Teresa wasn't just having an affair. She was actively feeding Armando information about DSS's clients, their security protocols, and Malcolm's personal business dealings. She'd become a security breach in human form. But Malcolm didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, he did what he'd been trained to do, he planned. Chapter 2. The Puppet Master. Malcolm's phone buzzed as he reviewed the latest surveillance reports on Armando Shepard. His contact at the Pentagon, Gordon Morton, had sent him a file that made for interesting reading. Gordon, Malcolm answered the call before it could ring twice. You're going to want to see this in person. Gordon's gravelly voice carried the weight of their shared history in military intelligence. Can you meet me at the usual place? An hour later, Malcolm sat across from Gordon in a dimly lit corner booth at Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar that catered to ex-military personnel and government contractors. Gordon slid a manila envelope across the table. Your boy Armando has quite the resume, Gordon said, lighting a cigarette despite the no-smoking sign. Real name is Armando Shepard Santos. Born in Colombia, immigrated here when he was 12. His father was Carlos Santos. Ring any bells? Malcolm's eyes narrowed. Carlos Santos had been a mid-level money launderer for the Medellin cartel in the 80s. Malcolm had encountered his operation during a classified mission in '91. The son learned from daddy's mistakes, Gordon continued. Instead of drugs, he went into financial seduction. We've been tracking him for 3 years. He's hid at least a dozen wealthy wives, extracting insider information that he sells to corporate competitors and occasionally to some very unfriendly foreign interests. And my wife is his biggest score yet. The information Teresa's been feeding him about DSS client security has already been sold twice. Once to a Chinese intelligence front company, and once to that Russian oligarch you helped the feds nail last year, Dmitry Volkov. Malcolm's jaw tightened. Volkov had sworn revenge after Malcolm's investigation had led to his assets being frozen and his eventual deportation. If Volkov had DSS security protocols, he could potentially target Malcolm's clients, or Malcolm himself. "There's more," Gordon said, stubbing out his cigarette. "Armando's planning to marry Teresa. Not for love, for permanent access. Once he's family, he'll have even more leverage to extract information. And if something were to happen to you, Teresa inherits half of everything." Malcolm finished the thought. The prenup he'd insisted on 20 years ago suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. "The wedding's in 6 months, right?" Malcolm nodded. Ruth, their daughter, had been ecstatic when Teresa announced her engagement to Armando just 3 months after the divorce was finalized. Kenneth, their son, had been more reserved, but even he seemed to accept his mother's new relationship. "I need everything you have on Armando's operation," Malcolm said. "Every contact, every financial transaction, every woman he's targeted." Gordon smiled grimly. "I was hoping you'd say that. Because this isn't just about your marriage anymore, Malcolm. This is about national security. And you're the perfect man to bring him down." As they parted ways, Malcolm felt the familiar rush of a mission beginning. Armando Shepard had made a fatal error. He'd underestimated exactly who he was targeting. Malcolm Dyer wasn't just another wealthy husband to be manipulated and discarded. He was a predator who'd spent decades learning how to destroy enemies who threatened American interests. And now, Armando had just become Malcolm's most personal target. Chapter 3: Family Fractures. The tension in the Dyer family had reached a breaking point by Christmas. Malcolm sat alone in his downtown penthouse, looking at the family photo on his desk, a relic from happier times when Ruth and Kenneth still believed their parents' marriage was solid. Ruth had chosen sides immediately after the divorce, embracing Teresa's narrative that Malcolm was a cold, obsessive workaholic who'd driven their mother away. At 21, Ruth was completing her senior year at Columbia, studying international relations with dreams of joining the State Department. She'd inherited her mother's beauty and her father's intelligence, but also Teresa's talent for emotional manipulation. "Dad, you need to accept that Mom is happy now," Ruth had said during their last conversation. "Armando treats her like a queen. He actually pays attention to her." Kenneth, 19 and studying computer science at MIT, had been more diplomatic but equally disappointing. He tried to play mediator, suggesting family therapy and compromise. What Kenneth didn't understand was that Malcolm didn't compromise with traitors. The final straw had come during Thanksgiving dinner. Malcolm had accepted Teresa's invitation, hoping to maintain some relationship with his children. The evening had been a carefully orchestrated performance, with Armando playing the perfect stepfather-to-be and Teresa radiating happiness. But Malcolm had noticed things others missed. The way Armando's eyes cataloged every detail of Malcolm's clothes, watch, and mannerisms, how he steered conversation toward DSS's recent high-profile contracts, the subtle questions about Malcolm's travel schedule and security arrangements. When Armando had casually mentioned recognizing the name of one of DSS's classified government clients, information that should have been completely compartmentalized, Malcolm knew Teresa's betrayal was even deeper than he'd suspected. That night, Malcolm had made his decision. This wouldn't be a simple divorce and custody arrangement. This would be total war. He'd spent the following months systematically documenting every aspect of Armando's operation. Using resources from his intelligence days and DSS's investigative capabilities, Malcolm had built a comprehensive picture of his enemy's network. Armando had been busy. Beyond Teresa, he was currently managing relationships with 2 other wealthy wives, Lucinda Marquez, married to a defense contractor in Virginia, and Penny Root, whose husband owned a chain of luxury hotels. All 3 women believed they were Armando's only love. All 3 were feeding him insider information, and all 3 were being played in service of a larger scheme. The scheme, Malcolm discovered, was breathtaking in its scope. Armando wasn't just selling information. He was building a database of American corporate and government vulnerabilities that he planned to auction to the highest bidder. Foreign intelligence services, terrorist organizations, and criminal syndicates had all expressed interest in purchasing the complete package. Teresa's wedding to Armando was scheduled for June 15th at the exclusive Riverside Country Club. Ruth had been chosen as maid of honor, while Kenneth would walk Teresa down the aisle, a role that should have been Malcolm's in different circumstances. Malcolm wouldn't be attending as a guest. He wouldn't be there to give his blessing or play the role of the gracious ex-husband. He would be there to watch his enemies destroy themselves, because by June 15th, Malcolm would have activated the most comprehensive revenge operation of his career. As he reviewed his plans one final time, Malcolm felt no guilt, no hesitation, no mercy. Teresa had chosen to betray not just their marriage, but their country. Ruth and Kenneth had chosen to embrace the enemy and reject their father. They would all learn that Malcolm Dyer was not a man who forgave such betrayals. The wedding would be memorable, Malcolm thought grimly, just not in the way anyone expected. Chapter 4. The Wedding Day Trap. The Riverside Country Club buzzed with activity as guests arrived for what everyone believed would be a fairy tale wedding. Malcolm observed from his car in the parking lot, watching through binoculars as Teresa's friends and family entered the venue. She looked radiant in her designer gown, every inch the blushing bride embarking on a new chapter of her life. Malcolm checked his watch, 2:47 p.m. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 p.m., followed by a reception that would last until evening. He timed everything perfectly. His phone rang. "Status report," he answered. "All pieces are in position." Gordon Morton's voice was crisp and professional. "Are you sure you want to do this at the wedding? A lot of innocent people around." "The innocent people chose their side when they decided to celebrate my wife's betrayal," Malcolm replied. "Besides, no one will be physically harmed. I'm not a terrorist, Gordon. I'm a surgeon removing a cancer." Malcolm stepped out of his car and adjusted his tailored black suit. He hadn't been invited to the wedding, but that had never been the plan. He was here to make an appearance, deliver a message, and then watch his carefully constructed trap spring shut. As he approached the country club's entrance, Malcolm felt the familiar calm that preceded a mission. Every variable had been accounted for, every contingency planned. Today wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. The ceremony was already underway when Malcolm slipped into the back of the chapel. Teresa stood at the altar with Armando, radiant in white, while the man she was marrying prepared to commit treason. Ruth stood as maid of honor, beautiful and naive, while Kenneth had taken his seat after walking his mother down the aisle. Malcolm waited until the minister asked if anyone objected to the union. The traditional pause hung in the air, and Malcolm almost smiled at the irony. He could object. He had evidence that would destroy both bride and groom, but he remained silent. Sometimes the most devastating objection was the one never spoken. As the couple exchanged vows, Malcolm's phone buzzed with a text from his asset in Colombia. Package delivered. Phase 1 was complete. The ceremony concluded with Armando kissing his new bride as the gathered guests erupted in applause. Malcolm watched as his daughter Ruth beamed with happiness, as Kenneth dutifully smiled for the cameras, as Teresa gazed adoringly at the man who'd just become her husband and co-conspirator. They had no idea what was coming. Malcolm slipped out of the chapel before the recessional and positioned himself near the country club's main entrance. The reception would begin in an hour, giving him time to make his presence known and plant the seeds of what was to come. He didn't have to wait long. Armando emerged first, still in his tuxedo, heading toward the parking lot where several black SUVs had been stationed, security that Malcolm recognized as entirely unnecessary for a simple wedding reception. "Congratulations on your marriage," Malcolm said, stepping out from behind a pillar. Armando spun around, his hand instinctively moving toward his jacket, a tell that confirmed Malcolm's suspicions about his true background. When he saw Malcolm, his expression shifted from alarm to predatory satisfaction. "Malcolm Dyer," Armando said, his accent barely detectable after years of practice. "I didn't expect to see you here. I wouldn't miss my daughter's happiness for anything," Malcolm replied evenly. Though I have to say, I'm surprised she invited me. Teresa certainly didn't want me here. Your ex-wife has moved on. Armando stepped closer, his body language radiating threat. You should too. Oh, I've moved on. Malcolm smiled, and something in his expression made Armando take an involuntary step back. In fact, I've moved so far that I'm already 3 steps ahead of you. Before Armando could respond, Teresa appeared at the country club's entrance, still in her wedding gown, but looking frantic. Armando, we need to. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw Malcolm. What are you doing here? Pay my respects to the happy couple, Malcolm said, and saying goodbye. Security. Armando called toward the SUVs, but Malcolm raised a hand. That won't be necessary. I was just leaving. He pulled out his phone and speed dialed a number. But before I go, I thought you might want to know that your honeymoon has been canceled. The call connected, and Malcolm spoke a single word into the phone. Execute. Then he smiled at the newlyweds, turned, and walked away without another word, leaving them standing in confused fury as the first phase of their destruction began to unfold. Chapter 5. The Call That Changed Everything. Malcolm was halfway to his car when he heard Armando's voice explode behind him. You're nothing to her anymore, loser. She doesn't want to see your pathetic face. The words carried across the country club parking lot, causing several guests to turn and stare. Malcolm paused, his hand on his car door, and slowly turned around. Armando had followed him, his face red with rage and alcohol from the pre-ceremony champagne. Armando, don't. Teresa called from the entrance, but her new husband was beyond reason. You think you can just show up here and intimidate us? Armando spat, advancing on Malcolm. You lost, old man. She chose me. Your daughter chose me. Your whole family chose me over you because they finally saw what a cold, heartless bastard you really are. Malcolm studied Armando's face. The flush of victory, the arrogance of a predator who believed he'd successfully claimed his territory. It was almost a shame to destroy someone at the peak of their delusion. You're absolutely right, Malcolm said quietly. They did choose you. The simple agreement seemed to deflate some of Armando's rage, but Malcolm wasn't finished. The question is, Malcolm continued, pulling out his phone, what exactly did they choose? He dialed a number and put the phone to his ear. When it connected, he spoke clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Gordon, it's Malcolm. Activate Operation Family Tree. Full execution. No delays. Then he hung up, smiled at Armando and Teresa, and got into his car without another word. As Malcolm drove away, he checked his watch. 4:23 p.m. By 5:23 p.m., Armando Shepard's world would begin to collapse. By evening, the man who'd just humiliated him in front of dozens of witnesses would understand exactly who he'd been trying to manipulate. Malcolm's phone rang as he pulled onto the highway. Package 1 delivered, came a voice with a slight Colombian accent. Target's father received the photos exactly as scheduled. And Package 2, Immigration and Customs Enforcement received their anonymous tip 15 minutes ago. They're very interested in Mr. Shepard's financial records. Package 3, the DEA file on Carlos Santos just landed on the desk of every major news outlet in the city. Amazing how someone's past can catch up with them. Malcolm smiled as he disconnected the call. He'd spent 6 months preparing for this moment, using every contact from his intelligence days and every resource at DSS's disposal. Armando had made the fatal mistake of thinking Malcolm was just another wealthy ex-husband, someone to be manipulated and discarded. He had no idea that Malcolm Dyer was a man who'd spent decades destroying America's enemies, and who had just decided that his new son-in-law qualified for that designation. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The Eagle has landed. Crying commenced at 5:21 p.m. Malcolm glanced at his watch. 5:22 p.m. Right on schedule. At that exact moment, 60 miles away, Armando Shepard was discovering that his new father-in-law was not the broken, defeated man he'd appeared to be. Instead, Malcolm was something far more dangerous, a predator who'd been playing a game where Armando didn't even know the rules. The wedding reception would continue for another 3 hours, but the celebration had already ended. Malcolm had kept his promise to make a single phone call and leave without a word. Everything that happened next was simply the consequence of crossing a man who never forgot, never forgave, and never lost. Chapter 6. The Reckoning begins. At 5:21 p.m., Armando Shepard received a phone call that would shatter his world. He was in the country club's bridal suite, adjusting his tie and savoring his victory over Malcolm, when his phone rang with a number he hadn't seen in 15 years. "Papa." Armando answered in Spanish, his voice suddenly small and uncertain. What followed was a conversation that lasted exactly 97 seconds. When it ended, Armando was on his knees, sobbing like a child, his carefully constructed facade crumbling into ruins. Teresa found him there 20 minutes later, still clutching his phone, his tuxedo wrinkled and his face streaked with tears. "Armando, what's wrong? The guests are asking where we are." "He knows," Armando whispered, his accent now thick with panic. "Dios mío, he knows everything." "Who knows? What are you talking about?" Armando looked up at his new wife, and Teresa saw something in his eyes that she'd never seen before, genuine terror. "Your ex-husband isn't just some security consultant," Armando said, his voice breaking. He's Malcolm fucking Dyer." Teresa stared at him blankly. "I don't understand." "Operación Limpieza," Armando whispered. "Operation Cleanup. Colombia, 1991. My father used to tell stories about an American intelligence operative who destroyed the Santos money laundering network in a single night. Killed 12 men, caused 3 others to disappear forever, and sent my uncle Carlos to prison for 40 years. The color drained from Teresa's face. Malcolm was in the military, but he never talked about his deployments, because he was classified above your clearance level. Armando shouted, then immediately lowered his voice as if afraid of being overheard. "My father just received photographs, Teresa. Photographs of me with you, with Lucinda, with Penny. Photographs of financial records, meeting locations, everything. And a note that said, 'Your son chose the wrong family to target.'" Teresa sank into a chair, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk. "That's impossible. Malcolm is he's just Malcolm. No, mi amor. Malcolm Dyer is a legend in certain circles. A ghost story that parents tell their children to make them behave. And I've been feeding him information through his own wife for 2 years, thinking I was so clever." Armando's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed his lawyer's name. "Don't answer it," Teresa said, but Armando was already swiping to accept. "Mr. Shepard?" The lawyer's voice was tight with panic. "I need you to listen very carefully. ICE just executed search warrants on all of your properties. They're calling it a national security investigation. They have financial records going back 10 years and witness statement from 3 different women claiming you solicited classified information." Armando closed his eyes. "How long do I have?" "You need to be in my office first thing Monday morning. And Mr. Shepard, whatever you've been doing, whatever this is about, it's not just federal charges anymore. The DEA just released information suggesting your operation might be connected to Colombian drug trafficking. Every news station in the city is running the story." When the call ended, Armando and Teresa sat in silence, the weight of their situation settling over them like a burial shroud. "He destroyed me," Armando said finally. "In one phone call, he destroyed everything I've built in 15 years. "We can fight this," Teresa said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We can hire the best lawyers." "With what money?" Armando laughed bitterly. "By tomorrow morning, every account I have will be frozen. Every asset I own will be under federal investigation. I'm finished, Teresa. We're finished." As if summoned by his words, there was a knock at the bridal suite door. "Mr. and Mrs. Shepard?" came a voice from the hallway. "This is Agent Catherine Ross with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We need to speak with you both." Teresa looked at her new husband, the man she believed was her ticket to a better life, and saw him transformed into something she didn't recognize. Gone was the confident, sophisticated charmer who'd swept her off her feet. In his place was a terrified little boy who'd just learned that the monster from his father's bedtime stories was real, and had been hunting him all along. What have we done? Teresa whispered. Armando had no answer. He was too busy calculating how long it might take Malcolm Dyer to completely destroy everything he'd ever cared about. The answer, he was beginning to realize, was probably measured in hours, not days. Chapter 7. The Puppet Strings Revealed. By Monday morning, the Shepherd Santos story had exploded across every major news outlet. Malcolm watched the coverage from his office at DSS headquarters, feeling a satisfaction that went beyond simple revenge. This was justice being served with the precision he'd learned during his intelligence days. The phone rang. Malcolm glanced at the caller ID and smiled. Hello, Ruth. Dad. His daughter's voice was small, uncertain in a way he hadn't heard since she was a child. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. I've never lied to you, sweetheart. Did you plan this? Mom's wedding, everything that's happening to Armando. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully. Ruth deserved honesty, even if she wouldn't like it. Your mother made her choice when she decided to betray our family and our country, he said finally. Armando made his choice when he decided to target us. I simply made sure they faced the consequences of those choices. But the news is saying he's connected to drug cartels, that he's been selling government secrets. Because that's exactly what he's been doing, Ruth. For years. Your mother wasn't just having an affair. She was committing treason. Every piece of information she gave him about my work, about my clients, about our family was being sold to foreign intelligence services and criminal organizations. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Ruth spoke again. How long have you known? About the affair? 2 years. About the espionage? 18 months. About Armando's real identity and background? 6 months. And you didn't tell us? Malcolm's voice hardened. I try to protect this family, Ruth. I gave your mother multiple opportunities to end the affair and come clean. Instead, she chose to escalate her betrayal. And both of my children chose to support her decision. We didn't know. You didn't want to know, Malcolm corrected. There's a difference. You saw what you wanted to see. A successful, charming man who made your mother happy. You never asked the hard questions because the answers might have been inconvenient. Ruth's breathing was shaky on the other end of the line. What's going to happen to them? That depends on how much they cooperate with federal investigators. Armando is looking at decades in federal prison. Your mother, if she's very lucky and very helpful, she might avoid charges altogether. And if she's not lucky, Malcolm's smile was cold. Then she'll learn what happens to traitors in this country. After Ruth hung up, Malcolm turned his attention to the stack of files Gordon had delivered that morning. Phase 2 of Operation Family Tree was ready to commence, and this phase would be far more personal. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Dyer? There's a Kenneth Dyer here to see you. Says he's your son. Send him in. Kenneth entered the office looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past weekend. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. Dad, we need to talk. Sit down, son. Kenneth remained standing. Is it true? Everything they're saying about Armando. Every word. And Mom was either a willing accomplice or the most useful fool in the history of espionage. Kenneth flinched. That's our mother you're talking about. That's a traitor I'm talking about. Malcolm corrected. The woman who raised you died the day she chose to betray this family. You could have warned us. I could have, Malcolm agreed. But you and your sister made it clear whose side you were on. You chose to support your mother's new relationship without asking questions, without investigating the man she was bringing into our family. That was your decision. Kenneth sank into the chair across from Malcolm's desk. What do you want from us? I want you to understand that choices have consequences. Your mother chose treason. You and Ruth chose to support her. Armando chose to target the wrong family. Malcolm leaned forward. I chose to destroy them all. Even us. Malcolm studied his son's face, the boy he taught to throw a baseball, the young man he'd been proud to see accepted to MIT. That depends, Kenneth. Are you going to continue supporting your mother, or are you going to remember who your real family is? Kenneth was quiet for a long moment. What would you need me to do? Testify truthfully about everything you observed. Your mother's behavior, Armando's questions about my work, any suspicious activities you witnessed. And if I do that, then you remain my son. If you don't, Malcolm shrugged, then you'll learn that I don't make exceptions for blood relatives who choose to stand against me. As Kenneth left his office, Malcolm felt no satisfaction in breaking his children's illusions. But he learned long ago that sometimes the people you loved most were the ones who could hurt you deepest. And Malcolm Dyer had never been a man who tolerated betrayal from anyone, not even his own family. The game was far from over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Malcolm had spent too many years learning how to destroy his enemies to be stopped by sentiment or family loyalty. They would all learn that lesson before this was finished. Chapter 8. The Final Manipulation. Teresa sat in the federal holding facility, staring at the wall of her cell and trying to understand how her perfect new life had collapsed so completely. 3 days had passed since her wedding, but it felt like a lifetime. Her lawyer, a public defender named Patricia, had been blunt about her situation. Mrs. Shepard, you're facing potential charges of conspiracy to commit espionage, conspiracy to transmit classified information to foreign agents, and accessory to money laundering. If convicted on all counts, you're looking at 45 years to life in federal prison. But I didn't know. Teresa had protested. I thought Armando was just interested in my life and Malcolm's work. I never meant to. Intent doesn't matter in espionage cases. Patricia had cut her off. What matters is what you did and what damage resulted. And the prosecution has enough evidence to bury you. Now, sitting alone in her cell, Teresa finally understood the magnitude of her situation. Malcolm hadn't just exposed Armando's operation. He'd systematically documented her own involvement, creating an ironclad case that would destroy her life. The door to her cell opened. A guard stepped aside, revealing Malcolm himself. "Hello, Teresa." She looked up at her ex-husband, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Gone was any pretense of the mild-mannered businessman she'd married. The man standing before her radiated the quiet menace of a professional killer. "You did this," she said. "You did this," Malcolm corrected, stepping into the cell as the guard closed the door behind him. "Every choice, every betrayal, every piece of information you gave to Armando. You built your own prison. I never meant to hurt anyone. You meant to hurt me," Malcolm interrupted. "You meant to take half of everything I'd built and give it to a foreign agent. You meant to destroy our family, so you could start a new life with a man you barely knew." Teresa's composure finally cracked. "I was lonely. You were never home, never present, never." "Never what, Teresa? Never fought in classified wars to keep our country safe? Never built a company that employed hundreds of people? Never provided you with a lifestyle that 99% of the world could only dream of?" Malcolm moved closer, and Teresa instinctively pressed herself against the cell wall. "You want to know the truth?" Malcolm continued. "I knew about your affair 6 months before I filed for divorce. I could have ended it then, quietly, with minimal damage to our family. But you didn't just want out of our marriage. You wanted to punish me for not being the perfect husband you thought you deserved. That's not. So I'll let you dig your own grave," Malcolm said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I watched you commit felony after felony, documenting everything, waiting for you to choose between your family and your revenge fantasy. And you chose revenge." Teresa began to cry, but Malcolm felt no sympathy. "I've been offered a deal," she said through her tears. "Full cooperation in exchange for immunity." "I know. I helped draft the terms." Her head snapped up. "What? The federal prosecutors consulted with me before offering you that deal, Teresa. As a former intelligence operative and the primary victim of your husband's espionage ring, my opinion carries considerable weight." Malcolm smiled, and the expression was colder than anything Teresa had ever seen. "They want to know if I thought you deserved mercy. If I believed you were truly just a naive victim who'd been manipulated by a master manipulator." "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth. That you're an intelligent woman who made deliberate choices to betray your family and your country. That you deserve every year of the sentence you're about to receive." Teresa's breathing became rapid and shallow. "You could save me. You could tell them I was manipulated, that I didn't understand." "I could," Malcolm agreed. "But I won't. The children, Think about Ruth and Kenneth. I am thinking about them. I'm thinking about the lesson they need to learn about consequences, about loyalty, about what happens when you choose the wrong side in a war. Malcolm turned toward the door, then paused. There is one way I might be persuaded to help you, he said. Teresa leaned forward desperately. Anything. I'll do anything. Convince our children to publicly denounce you and Armando. Have them give interviews acknowledging that you're a traitor who chose a foreign agent over your own family. Make them understand that I was right to destroy you and that they were wrong to support you. Teresa stared at him in horror. You're asking me to destroy my relationship with my own children. I'm asking you to tell them the truth, Malcolm corrected. Something you've apparently forgotten how to do. He knocked on the door, and the guard began to open it. You have 48 hours to decide, Malcolm said as he stepped into the hallway. After that, the deal expires, and you'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison. As the door closed behind him, Teresa finally understood that she hadn't just lost her husband. She'd made an enemy of one of the most dangerous men in the country. And now she would have to choose between her freedom and her children's love, knowing that Malcolm had designed the choice specifically to ensure that no matter what she decided, she would lose everything that mattered to her. She realized, the perfect revenge. Chapter 9, The Last Gift. 2 months later, Malcolm stood on the balcony of his penthouse, reading the final report on Operation Family Tree. The results exceeded even his expectations. Armando Shepard Santos had been sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. His cooperation with investigators had revealed a network of espionage activities that reached into 12 countries and involved over 30 American citizens. The information Teresa had provided him had been sold to terrorist organizations, drug cartels, and hostile foreign governments. Teresa herself had chosen to take the immunity deal, but at a cost that would haunt her forever. She'd given a series of recorded interviews admitting her role in the espionage ring and publicly acknowledging that her children had been right to support their father. The interviews had been broadcast nationally, destroying any chance she had of rebuilding her reputation or maintaining relationships with her old social circle. Ruth and Kenneth had both testified against their mother and Armando, providing crucial evidence that helped secure the convictions. In exchange, Malcolm had welcomed them back into his life, though their relationships would never be the same. They'd learned that their father was not a man to be crossed, and that family loyalty was earned, not assumed. The 3 other women in Armando's network had all been arrested and charged. Lucinda Marquez and Penny Root had both received lengthy prison sentences, though shorter than what Armando and Teresa faced. Their families had been destroyed, their husbands ruined by association with their wives' treachery. Malcolm's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID. Ruth. Hello, sweetheart. Dad, I just wanted to let you know that Mom called. She's not doing well. I imagine not. Federal prison is a difficult adjustment for someone of her background. She asked me to tell you something. Malcolm waited. She said to tell you that you won, that she understands now what kind of man you really are, and that she's sorry she ever crossed you. And what did you tell her? Ruth's voice was quiet. I told her that I loved her, but that she made her choices, and that I finally understand why you did what you did. After Ruth hung up, Malcolm poured himself a scotch and returned to the balcony. The city spread out below him, millions of lights in the darkness, each one representing lives that continued their normal patterns of love and betrayal, loyalty and treachery. His secure phone rang, the one only a handful of people had access to. Dyer. Malcolm, it's Gordon. We've got a situation in Eastern Europe that requires your particular skill set. Are you available for a consultation? Malcolm smiled. At 57, he was old enough to retire, wealthy enough to disappear forever, and experienced enough to know that some men never really left the game. What do you need? As Gordon outlined the mission, Malcolm felt the familiar rush of a new hunt beginning. Teresa and Armando had been personal, enemies who'd made the mistake of targeting his family. This new assignment would be professional, clean, surgical. But first, Malcolm had one final task to complete. He walked to his desk and pulled out a manila envelope that had been delivered that morning. Inside were photographs of Teresa in her federal prison uniform, looking broken and aged beyond her years. Attached was a note from one of his contacts in the Bureau of Prisons. Subject continues to maintain her innocence regarding the extent of her involvement, but acknowledges her marriage to you was the biggest mistake of her life. She's requested permission to write you a letter of apology. Malcolm studied the photographs for a moment, then fed them into his paper shredder along with the note. Teresa's apology would remain unread, just as her pleas for mercy had gone unanswered. He'd given her 23 years of his life, built her a fortune, provided her with everything she could have wanted. In return, she'd chosen to betray him with a foreign agent and destroy their family. Malcolm Dyer was many things: soldier, spy, businessman, father. But he was not, and would never be, a man who forgave those who betrayed him. As he prepared for his next mission, Malcolm reflected on the lessons learned. Love was a luxury that intelligent men could rarely afford. Trust was a weapon that could be turned against you. And family, no matter how much you sacrifice for them, would always be capable of choosing your enemies over you. These were hard truths, but Malcolm had built his life around hard truths. They'd kept him alive through 3 decades of dangerous work, and they'd allowed him to destroy his enemies completely when the time came for justice. In the end, that was his greatest gift to his children, the knowledge that their father was not a man to be underestimated, betrayed, or forgotten. They would carry that lesson for the rest of their lives, and it would make them stronger, more careful, more aware of the consequences of their choices. It was, Malcolm thought as he locked his penthouse and headed for the airport, the last wedding gift. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.